here's thing instead, if you want me to.
So we're starting a little bit early, which will confuse the people who do the video streaming, and we don't have a mic, which will confuse it even more. But you can hear us, right? So I think the idea of this panel is really to get some feedback from you, yeah, from the audience. I mean, we know our ideas. we are severely entrenched, but we are open to ideas, and I think it would be nice to get an idea of what the priorities are, right? I mean, if we look at the future of Guix, I think I will state that Guix is already a success. It is just the start of it, but it's amazing what is happening, and we can build on it incrementally, which is very good for the future. But what should we focus on next, right? I mean, what's the most important thing you think that is going to to drive new Guix in the future? So maybe I should ask the panel members first, and then you can react.
Should I start?
Yep.
Okay. I think I'm going to just start straight with a conversation that we had a couple nights ago at the bar. I think the most important. So, I think we ought to just give a whole round of applause to this room first of all, because
yes.
This is our second year of this, like at the sub conference, right? Like the amount of energy and stuff in this room is just nuts. But I think so. One of the things we were talking about the other night is Guix is great. We all love Guix, but getting it in the hands of users is not necessarily very easy right now, right? One thing that I would love to see is be able to do apt-get install Guix, or even yum install Guix, I guess if you're on Fedora or whatever, right? One of the big blockers on this is that we have this /GNU thing, and it's not part of the file system hierarchy standard. So I think that I guess I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to monologue this, so maybe I have to figure out how to turn it over. I would really like to see Guix get packaged in Debian or etc., but we have to get over this /GNU not being a file system hierarchy standard thing. Now we could do one of a few things. We could switch over to /opt, just abandon the GNU thing. But I think that I'm looking at Ludovic's face. I don't think it's going to happen. We could, and so maybe I should hand it over to one of you two before I start. I feel like I'm monologuing, and I feel rude about that on the panel.
Oh, I really like listening to you.
Oh, okay. I'll just explain. I'll explain so some of the ideas we came up with are kind of successively crazy. Well, the first one is switching to opt. That's not going to happen. The second one is we can do basically what Piotr demonstrated today and just rewrite. We can substitute all packages, including, we can basically do a graft of all packages, including all the substitutes, all the grafted packages, and just rewrite them all from /GNU /store to /opt /store, and then that might make it much easier to package in Debian, or etc. The other crazy idea is to possibly have a user namespace. I think this was your idea, where people just in their .x session or whatever end up opening up a user namespace that basically remaps /opt /store to /GNU /store. And that's kind of getting crazier. And then the last crazy one is to get it in the actual FHS, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen. So that was a long rant and not really a panel kind of conversation. So I guess I'm going to hand it over to the rest of the group to say, how do you think that we can get Guix better adopted in the world?
So I should point out that I see a Debian developer sitting there in the back of the room. So maybe for this particular point, we could also think about the social approach to it. I don't know. Yeah, so getting Guix into Debian and other free distros is one thing. I think I'm also personally interested in having great use cases for Guix. So we've seen talks and discussions about a few of them. So one of them is high performance computing, where I think people are really needing. So it's really a niche in terms of users, but people are really in need of a solution and Guix seems to be satisfying in a number of ways, so that's one thing I'd like to push. And then we have this GuixSD thing, which is pretty cool, I think, and to make it even cooler in a number of use cases, there is Guix deploy, and so Chris has been looking at it, and before David Thompson also started toying with a way. So I should say what Guix deploy is, I guess. Right. So Guix deploy. So you have GuixSD where you run Guix system reconfigure Guix system VM, and you get one machine, right? One operating system instance. And the idea with Guix deploy is to allow you to actually deploy GuixSD on a number of machines, like on a cluster, on a network, something. So for those of you familiar with NixOps, this would be roughly the Guix equivalent to NixOps. That's the idea. And so I think the ability to deploy a whole bunch of machines in a reproducible fashion is really one of the killer apps that we could have in the forthcoming future.
It's hard to be the third person to say something novel. So I work as a system administrator in an HPC environment. So for me, HPC is kind of important. Not just personally, but I think if we can make people, system administrators, realize that Guix solves their problems in scientific computing, and they pick it up once, they're unlikely to change away from it again. So for me, this is a personal priority to get it adopted, because as soon as we have people in science depending on Guix, they cannot get away with not supporting it. You know? This is how I ended up supporting Guix. You know? So I know what I'm talking about here. I don't really know if apt-get install Guix is really an issue. If this is really a problem. Are there actually people who are interested in Guix who shy away from using it because they can't just apt-get install? Oh, what? Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Can I respond to that?
Please do.
Okay. So what I would love to do is have Media Goblin's default way to get up and running is either that you have a deb package, or like for Debian type users. But if you want to develop, for Guix users, they'll obviously already have it for GuixSD users, right? But if you're developing on something like Debian or Fedora or something like that, I would love people to be able to do Guix environment-l guix.scm. And right now, we have to either ask somebody to drop this binary install thing, which I think is not very nice for a lot of people. Like, it technically works, but there's good reasons to feel uncomfortable doing that, right? And like, if I could just say, oh, it's just like any of these other package managers you can just install out of the box on Debian, that would be huge. Like, I could just say, it's so easy to just pick up Guix, you have it already, right? And that would be, I know for my use cases at least, it would be big.
It's been a while since I used Debian, but I know that Ubuntu people use, what is it called, PPAs, right? Mm-hmm. That's a one-liner that you execute to add an additional repository that you trust, and then you can do apt-get install. Would that be sufficient, or does it really have to be official?
I mean, we could. That's okay. So that's another option as well. You know, I mean, I think that's another option to getting things installed. Though I think it would be even better if we could have Guix shipped with Debian itself, so that, because not everybody is going to want to edit their PPA list.
Yeah. So the question really is, what is the growth path that we are looking for, right? I mean, if you make it easy for people to install software, that's one thing, and I agree with Chris, that's possible. The Debian community has been highly resistant to, including package managers in their systems. But they have package managers, for languages, like PyPy and all that. I suppose it could be worked on, right? But it's going to probably be a long haul. But yeah, the question is also now what type of user do you want to attract? I mean, you really want to attract users that start contributing to Guix, right? Which tend to be people who develop software.
No, not necessarily. I was going to say, I mean, there's the...
I'm just pointing it.
Yeah, I'm just pointing forward. I mean, the other thing I was going to say is that what I really like the idea about is this kind of thing that David Thompson, I think, as well has been working on, is the container idea, the Guix system container, which I think could be a massive thing in terms of like, well, web service development. I guess for media company, but also like for stuff that I'm doing, it's just kind of anything that requires multiple services to be running would be lovely to just do it in a container. And I think there are communities out there, I definitely think the community that I'm working in is still looking for a really nice development environment. But going to them and saying, okay, you just need to kind of first set up, Guix in a complicated way, and then you can use this amazing. That basically, why change the current development environment that they have, which works but is a hassle, for another one that is also a hassle and then also works in many better ways, but also just works, So I think in that sense, and those are people that develop software, but they're also users, and it's a niche. I think that would definitely we could fill.
So many of us talk about how we love that Guix could be a replacement for things like Docker and stuff like that, right? But we don't expect that every user of Docker has to be a Docker contributor in order to be able to make use of those features, which I think is kind of ties in with what you're saying. So I don't think that everyone should. We want as many people as possible to send us patches and to learn Scheme and stuff like that. But I don't think that it should be a prerequisite for taking advantage of all of Guix's things.
Currently, actually, this happens already. Many people send us patches.
Too many.
Yeah. This is a good problem to have, but it actually is also a problem because managing all these patches, making sure that nobody's left out. That's actually one of the points on our list here.
Yep.
It's kind of hard to make sure that people continue contributing when their contributions don't end up being part of Guix eventually. Maybe you want to say something about this? Because I lost the train of thought.
Well, this is something that the audience members can help with, right? We could use help with people reviewing patches on the list, and reviewing a patch can, for the first time, actually be as easy as once you get the Guix development environment set up, actually trying to apply the patch and just see if it works on your system, right? And that doesn't require a lot of Scheme expertise. And in fact, I think Ludovic and a few others have had talks about plenty of people don't have Scheme expertise when they start with Guix and pick it up as they go, right? So as a call out to people in the audience, that's something you can do. Actually, I want to make one more call out for something that people can do to push along one of the things that we talked about previously, which is making Guix deploy happen. If anybody in the audience is interested in getting Guix SD running on like commodity VPS hosting type things, that would push along our work tremendously and document it. And if you can do that, that'll help us move along in the server space dramatically. And that's something, I'm sure there are a number of people in this audience whose skills could apply to that.
Yeah, and another one is adding support to continuous integration systems like Travis. Yeah, if people could just deploy a package, say Ruby, run the software, do the testing, run in the testing environment, that would also be a very highly visible project. Because I think 50% of developers in open source software are actually using Travis now.
Should we throw another one to the audience?
Yeah, we can ask.
So does somebody have a question about the future of Guix and et cetera that they'd like to ask, or a strongly worded opinion?
So one thing that I thought about when you were talking about installers and the Travis is some installer that can run as a shell script or batch script and can run in an automated way. So for people just installing Guix who want to just install Guix, that would be useful. Even on Debian, I think it would mean they wouldn't have to keep it manual if they didn't want to. And also perhaps for things like Tavis, it would also be useful because you could just run it first and then do anything with Guix, possibly.
Yep. Right, so the question is about how we could facilitate the installation of Guix, right? And yeah, so currently if you're using the so-called binary table, which is a precompiled Guix, you have to then go to the manual and do each of the steps one by one and make sure you don't forget anything. And that's kind of not super convenient. And you're suggesting that we should have a script that does that by default, right?
Available as an option.
Yeah. And yeah, that's probably a good idea. Actually, it's been discussed a couple of times, and I think we probably should do it. Although there is the problem that, we are shipping a big binary, which is already, I can imagine that some people are not comfortable with it. And so if we also tell them, well, just run this shell script and don't worry, it's going to be fine. Just the perception could be pretty bad. So it's a bit like curl pipe sh, right? So we need to be careful, I think, about this also.
Can we get a quick poll of the room? I'd love to see how people's experiences of getting up and running with Guix/GeeksSD, I guess, would be. So here's the range that it's going to be. Very good experience, pretty good, and could use some work. All right, so let's go with the very good. How many hands go? Wait, how many people are running Guix or GeeksSD? Can you raise your hands on that first? Whoa, lots. Okay. All right, now let's go for the very good. Oh man. Okay, what that means? That's a product now. Okay, so now that's 6. So let's okay, Guix first. Very good. Okay. Pretty good. Okay. How about could use some work? Okay. What about GeeksSD, which I think is a different beast? So, very good. How about pretty good? How about could use some work? Okay. So I think we're seeing that GeeksSD is considerably harder right now. My friend calls GeeksSD installation experience Gen 2 for adults, so, I don't know what to say after that, so I'm just going to randomly pass the microphone over.
Yeah, so what's the next topic here?
My experience, and this may have changed a little, my experience, because the last time I ran Guix on Debian is now over a year ago. But my experience was that setting up Guix on Debian I found easier, but then kind of making sure that all the environment variables are set and everything kind of works nicely, that is way harder. In GeeksSD, the installation procedure was a bit tricky, but now it's running like it's, I don't have to worry about anything basically.
That's absolutely
That's right.
So the complications also rise in different places.
Yeah, so what I did, someone built a recipe for a Debian package, and I changed that also for Ubuntu, and I just built that and installed it, so that's easier. But then, like you said, it's easier to just go GeeksSD because everything just works.
Yeah, Localis is also a nice one.
Yeah. True.
Guix does take care of a couple of environment variables for packages that you install, but that's not sufficient, right? There's this little bit of SSL stuff, for example, or the local,
Certificate.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's gotten really better, I think, because now it actually tells you.
It only tells you things for packages that have search path specifications, and is that not right?
That's right.
Oh, thank you. And this doesn't cover everything, which means there's always some manual intervention required, and that kills it a bit. So in my experience, when we are using Guix as such on the cluster, on a cluster computer environment and on workstations, and I try to make sure to provide a file that people can source that sets up the environment variables. Maybe we can provide something similar to that. I would really like to move away from the need to do this manually, because it trips me up as well too. Well, as well, too. Should have had that coffee.
So one topic we talking about here that I definitely want to make sure we don't miss is about community. I mean, obviously, we're hoping that we can engage with the community since have community in front of us. But I think that there are some things that, to me, it feels like we could do a lot better at. I don't think we're as sufficiently diverse as we could be, and I feel like there are probably, my experience, I've worked with projects that have really struggled in that regard and that have done better than average, and I think Lisp also has a reputation for being like curmudgeon-y people who think they have everything right, and then that kind of pushes a lot of people away. And it's partly because we do have a lot of things right, and so it's easy to be smart. But I mean, look at Clojure and Racket right now, which are like doing way better than like traditional Lisps, and we definitely could be better. I mean, one thing that I think could improve things a lot is, if we engage specifically with some groups like Outreachy or something like that, although that would require us having the funds to do that. But I'm really interested in what we can do to improve community and to lower the barrier, especially for the groups of people we don't currently have. I don't know where to go from there, but Ricardo.
I have a comment. So yesterday in the main theater, there was a talk on how to improve all ages access into your community. And one of my favorite suggestions they did is you can bring younger people into your community by asking them to do YouTube instructions. Because a lot of people can't code, but want to share their experience on using something as an operator.
Remediate outline
instructor. Oh, go where your audience is.
Yeah.
So you mean the project could share videos like giving instructions? Is that what you're...
You want people to remain in your community. You want people of all ages to contribute and then stay. But a lot of times, people will come and say, how can I help? And you'll say, well, unless you're a coder, you can't help. Right? So you never want to drive away effort. And so one thing that you can ask younger people to do, because it's part of their culture, is to video.
Well,
I
talk plenty about wanting more video stuff. So.
But you. No.
Oh yeah. So yeah, precisely. I had written an item about sharing the workload. It's all about all the kinds of tasks that we have to do somehow, and many of them are non-technical. Like, we have things like the website, like people posting about what they're doing with Guix, which doesn't have to be super sophisticated, and videos. Yeah, that's definitely one thing, like to help people discover Guix and discover what it does, what it's used for, how it helps. And yeah, I agree that we should try to make it easier to discover what people can do in these areas. Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking about community, I would like to say thank you. Like, you've got a very good community or support. Like, the mailing list is very nice, and meeting you here personally is very nice. And what I'm missing from community is like a web front end, like a GitLab or something. There are some discussions about it. So what's the state currently about this one?
Well, I can go. Well, I was talking about this with some other individuals last night, including Alex. We were talking about. So one of the problems is that, like, for example, before I got into Guix, I hated debugs. Like, I hate it, right? Like, and that's a bug tracking system we use, and it's like all email based, right? And I was trying to use the web interface to find things, and I'm like, this is the worst. Like, this web interface is terrible. Like, how do I manage it? Well, then I found out that there's a great Emacs mode, which is what everybody else uses, and it's just beautiful. And it's well, now I don't want to use anything else, right? So, but this is a traditional, especially in GNU, problem, is that we have all these things that once you pass this very high barrier to entry. It couldn't be better. But like, you're like, yeah, just like, I promise you you'll love it. Just run up this mountain. It's very tall, but you'll feel so great when you get to the top.
It's so nice.
Maybe make videos of how to use Emacs.
Videos wouldn't help me in using Emacs. I tried for 3 times to get into Emacs. The third time, I never got out anymore. You know, but the first few times I thought everybody's talking about it. I should use this too, and it just didn't stick because defaults matter as well. And I agree that debugs could be more discoverable. I also find it hard to use actually, and I think I'm the target audience. Yeah, and the mail-based workflow that we have, sending in patches, while it does have a lot of advantages, one of which is that you do not need to have some account on some web application where you have to log in and then click around and do things. You can just send an email. While this is great about it, it also makes it hard to keep track of things. It makes it hard to keep track of patches that you've sent in. But you can integrate this with org mode, I guess. And right. But I agree that there's a need for something that combines those two worlds, that makes it possible that we don't have to change too much in the way that our established workflows work for us, and that other people find it discoverable as well.
Yes, this is actually quite amazing because Guix is, as a system, as a packaging system, is really approachable. You know, it's much easier than doing Debian packaging. I dabbled in that too, and I gave up. You know. Yeah. So the amazing thing about Guix is that you actually can write packages quite, low profile, easily get it done, get it tested, and run. But then you hit a barrier because you have to submit it to, the trunk. And I've successfully got some packages in, so I'm proud enough to say that it works. But I find it so hard and tedious that I actually don't do it at this point. And the question really to the maintainers of Guix is, can we not find a way that we, please both audiences? One is the highly professional, I should say, one that has gone over the mountain, and they're happily above there somewhere. But it's also people that just would like to use something like GitHub. Yeah, submit a patch, have somebody look at it, and get some response. It doesn't necessarily even have to go into mainline. Yeah, the point really is that you want to make it easy for people to get comments, and encourage them actually to continue working on those patches until the point that they're actually ready to get it to trunk.
So part of the challenge with this is that this is it would be great to have a big complicated tool that doesn't exist, and like everybody is busy in the community already with our own big complicated tools that do exist and take a lot of work, right? So I know that I can't remember what it is. It's a conservancy software hosting thing. You know what I'm talking about? They were really interested in having something that both has an API that you could use in Emacs and stuff, but then also has a web interface and stuff like that. But that project doesn't have also, I don't know if it has a lot of momentum right now. So Calathea, I think that's it, right? So these things are really important and useful. Right now, we're stuck between choices that seem very binary, right? They're either you've got I don't know what the answer is for that.
Yeah, so regarding tooling, I think there's a kind of a cultural issue. I mean, it's pretty clear that, some of us are kind of used to the current workflow and everything, so it makes it harder to move to something else in general. That said, I can understand that it's not necessarily trivial. It's like that big mountain, definitely, for people who are not used to it. So one option would be to have some sort of an instance of GitLab that we could use and test drive. We don't have maybe to switch directly to something, but we could try out something, right? And maybe have two systems at the same time while we figure out how things work and whether it's good for us. And I've been told by an Emacs person that GitLab is not that bad even for for the kind of person like me who likes to do things in Emacs and have email and stuff. So I don't know, maybe it's an option. I guess we just need to try out, and yeah. But it's also about trying out another tool, and that's quite a lot of work also. So that's not trivial. So yeah.
I mean, why not have two systems and call one the incubator or the teacher or the helper, where people actually learn, and it could actually be managed by different people. It doesn't have to be the same thing.
Right. I think you're talking more about processes than tools, right?
Yeah.
I think when someone posts patches to the mailing list, so definitely way too often it takes time to get an answer. I completely agree. But most of the time there are people who try to do some sort of mentorship, and I think it's quite good, I would say. But obviously it doesn't really scale also. And I mean, just because we have two different tools or two different repos, let's say, doesn't mean that there will be double the number of people to actually do that work. And that's a scalability issue.
We also don't want to end up in the situation where we have two completely disjoint systems that are very important. Yeah. So wait, do we want to jump onto I feel like we've covered that one pretty well. Do we have other? Well, wait.
I just maybe wanted to say like two things. Like first of all, I mean, this is not just a Guix problem, right? I mean, this is a hard problem. Like
Debian has this too, right?
But also like the project that I work in with work, like we've got a bug tracker, and there are tons of patches that just sit there. And just people don't get around to them, and especially people who are not necessarily like whose first patches it is, were not really known in the community. Like there is this kind of element of like someone, therefore you kind of might look at the patch earlier. There is that element, and that's kind of just part of like large projects. It is a hard problem to a certain extent. Tools definitely help, so we need to investigate it. But I thought it was worth saying that it is
and
a hard problem.
I do think that it is easy sometimes to kind of obsess over believing that tools will fix the problem when that's not necessarily true. I mean, I do think we should be working on it, right? But Media Goblin has a lot of issues in its tracker, and it has a web interface bug tracker, right? And the average GitHub repository has no shortage of issues and pull requests, right? So, there's a lot we can do to make it easier, but of course, it's easy to kind of put so much faith in if we could only get better tools, and that especially happens with programmers, right? Because we love tools, right? So, but a lot of it is also social too. It's there, and it's not one or the other. It's both, I think.
The other thing I wanted to say, sorry, you go first.
Yeah, I wanted to.
Sorry, it was someone behind you who was had a hand up.
We'll do you after.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm a Nix user. So there's obviously lots of overlap between Guix and Nix, and there seems to be lots of work at once. Is there any plan of making this easier to interrupt, like a standard to be able to use one package from one tool in the other? Or you mentioned Nixoft, which is already a fairly good tool. It would be a real shame to redo it from scratch on Guix, I think.
Should we add the Nix language to as on top of the Guile virtual machine? That's the solution.
So the question is about how we can avoid overlap between Nix and Guix, or share work. Sharing work, yeah. That's a difficult question because so the low-level part is the same, right? So in theory we have derivation and Nix has derivation, and that's the same thing. But then it's not just a technical issue, right? Like Guix is building a fully free distribution, for instance, whereas NixPKG is doing something different, which is, an important project also, but we have different thing and different views on how to do things, like even packaging or that kind of thing. So we cannot ignore this part of the problem, right? It's not just technical. But then, yes, I definitely think that we should, at the very least, share ideas, if not code. We actually already share code. We've been using the build daemon from Nix, and it's wonderful. Guix wouldn't exist without Nix in the first place, right? But yeah, sharing ideas at the very least is something we can do, and it's cheap, right? And I'm sure we have a lot to learn from each other. And we Geeks people have a lot to learn from NixOS, obviously, because NixOS and NixOps is more mature. So yeah, we should talk more, I would say.
You had a question, so, and we had a confusing pointing thing. So.
Yeah. No, it's not a question. It's a little story. I learned Emacs with a video by Piccode, and I had been trying for years. And then I've been told that Piccode, now it's not called Piccode anymore, it's been bought by someone, I don't remember exactly, but I've been told that they do not guarantee the freeness of the JavaScript on their site. So, yeah, that's it.
So, freeness of JavaScript is definitely a concern of mine. But part of the problem is that the web is also a large ocean that I don't have a lot of control over how much of it has free JavaScript, you know? So, I mean, you know, I guess the best thing you can do in that circumstance is contact them and encourage them to free their JavaScript, or, you know, submit it to a Media Goblin instance or something. But anyway, are there other questions?
One of my concerns was hackability. I mean, if I just wanted to modify EPC posts, for example, to add like an IPS or something, I don't necessarily want to edit and reconfigure to get it done. So I was wondering if you would accept something, a command like sudo edit, but like Guix edit, which just edits the file, put it in the store, and just go around.
Right, so yeah, I have mixed feelings because
Repeat the question, Ludo.
right, so the question is about how about having tools in GixSD that would allow you to quickly hack something as opposed to having to run Gix system reconfigure, right? Yeah, so I think, you know, the functional 100% reproducible model is inherently very static and a bit rigid too, right? I mean, we do Gix system reconfigure because we want to make sure we have the exact same system as if we had installed from scratch, right? But at the same time, I'm also a big fan of Geyser and REPLs and life hacking, and I'm also not fully satisfied with the fact that we have to go through this process every time we just want to make a single change. I would like to have something like, if you're familiar with Emacs, like control meter X, which means evaluate this expression right now. But I mean, it's a hard problem. I don't know how to merge the two requirements. So, I mean, I agree with you. We need something. I just don't know exactly what it should look like. I don't know.
I can only say that in my experience so far, I really like to reconfigure things. I always... you're talking about GixSD, right?
Yeah.
I've never actually hacked on the operating system as it is in the store in order to create some effect. You know, because I really like the guarantees that a reconfigured system gives me. This is what always annoyed me about traditional system configuration, is that you make a change here and you make a change there, and then you start forgetting exactly what has changed, and you try to recreate this, and there's no way to be sure that you recreated the exact same steps. And I feel that this should be a thing of the past. So if reconfiguration is considered an obstacle, we would have to figure out why that is. Is it too slow? Can we make it faster? I'd rather not soften the boundaries that we have. But that's just me personally. I do, however, hack on packages that were already built, because sometimes rebuilding everything from source, and you know that there's really just one, like Emacs, right? When you're hacking on Emacs, and you really just want to play with what's there. I did that before, just making the store writable again and. But I don't do this regularly, all right? I can understand the need for. I can understand the desire to do this, though. It goes against everything that we believe in.
I will atone for this.
I'm afraid you lost your credibility. I think. Yes. Oh. Maybe
a question over there. Very good. Yes. That's an additional comment.
Yes.
Also, a big plus is to keep your system configuration under version control.
Yep.
So you just check line, hit commit, and if system reconfigure, it really just a few seconds and you have a new system.
Yeah.
And you remember what it is.
Yeah, as an example, our build farm hydra.gnu.org, so it's not running GixSD because it dates back to the days where you could barely install packages with Guix, and so it's running Triscall, I think, and we've been hacking around on that machine to the point that we don't really know what's going on there. And so we're finally switching to a new build farm frontend, which is called Bayfront, which is running GixSD right from the start, and I can tell that yes, having everything under version control is wonderful.
We have this guy.
Yes, I wanted to ask something regarding the community participation and precisely about the peer-to-peer project, and if it's still on the agenda, the idea of package sharing, and which is the rationale, or which is the status.
Is that the GNU.net stuff?
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, so the question is about sharing packages over in a peer-to-peer fashion. So there was a GSOC project on this topic about using GNU.NET's file sharing component and pushing binaries to GNU.NET instead of using HTTP basically. And I think that's something many of us still want to see happening, but it's just that technically there are still obstacles. One of them is that GNU.NET doesn't yet have a stable release process, and so that makes things a bit more difficult. Right, but yeah, for instance, during GSOC, the student wrote bindings for GNU.NET, guide bindings, and also some sort of a proof of concept that would allow you to push binaries to GNU.NET and to kind of retrieve them, but it was, yeah, a proof of concept. And again, as GNU.NET is currently a moving target, we don't seem to be able to make much progress on this one.
I think we're technically over time, but maybe we can still excuse having at least one more question that probably goes to Ludovic more than anyone. But, you know, Ludovic and Ricardo, you're both maintainers. But I see 1.0 in 2017 on there. What do we need next to get to 1.0? What are the next steps?
I can just read it. No. One thing that is, I think we would all agree is bad about Guix at this point is Guix pull. Yeah. And it's also because none of us are using it. So we don't feel the pain as often as we should to change it. And Guix pull needs to become better. Guix pull is anyone using Guix pull here?
I occasionally.
By accident.
Because once you type git pull, and
I copy paste from the documentation.
Guix pull is a very naive implementation right now. It gets the latest version of Guix, compiles that, and creates a symlink so that the version of Guix you're using is the latest version.
It's actually not even true.
Part of that, right? It's the guide part of it.
But it's also, it's not as safe as we'd like either.
Yeah. So for 1.0, Guix should be extended such that not only it becomes actually usable, but we've been thinking about this a lot, we've discussed this a lot, that we would like to be able to go back in time with Guix, so that you can say, I would like to have Guix at this particular version without having to use low-level tools like Git, right? Checking out an old version and running make there and then using that to build an old version of a piece of software that was available in Guix's history. Guix should be the front end for that, so that you can have multiple versions of Guix that you can switch to and from, and that relates closely to the idea of having channels.
to Guix's credit, I think it's not obvious how bad it is to most users, but that's also to its detriment, that they don't know how bad things are under the hood and how much they should be worried about. Okay, wait, I shouldn't say that out loud, but
Don't use Guix school.
Yeah, just to give an idea of how bad it is, we're
gonna scare off half our audience. We're gonna run away.
But I mean, fortunately, it's not just our problem. It's a problem that we share with pretty much any project that uses Git nowadays, which is that Guixpool is essentially fetching stuff from Git, but it does not authenticate what it's fetching, right? So, like we're fetching from Savannah, but if there's a man-in-the-middle attack, you're fetching a different set of packages and you don't even notice, right? And that's a bit of a problem. But it turns out that everyone has this problem with Git. I mean, so there is work. People are starting to realize that it's kind of a problem. We need to be able to authenticate checkouts, but there is no simple solution, right?
Well, that's the next item on the list.
Perfect. And so that's something we need to work on. And for example, distro people have been looking at, I mean, there is this thing called the Update Framework, TUF, and it's great, but it's really biased towards distros that have, source on one hand and binaries and repos on the other hand. Like in